Ted, I'm going to start with you. We are taught in life to treat people with compassion, to love thy neighbor, to be respectful of each other. In watching the Democratic debates, in watching the Democratic debates, and we're going to continue through this process. In watching the Democratic debates, what we noticed Okay, we've heard it. We've heard it. Then we're going to have this conversation.
We want you to talk about immigration right now.
We are going to talk about immigration in about 25 minutes. We will talk about immigration in 25 minutes. You see, what's different about this forum is that everyone is going to get a chance to be heard, and we're going to address all of these issues, but we're going to do so with respect, dignity, and civility. So, Ted, I will address that issue. Here's my deal, is we will address it for 10 minutes up here if you will take the banner and sit down. Otherwise, we will not address it at all. There's a way to do this the right way, and that is the right way.
They're probably not supposed to get involved.
Ted. Everyone, give a hand to our men and women in uniform. Well, I was going to say that we don't treat each other with civility, but I just saw it right here. So what should be done? Sitting at a table with your colleagues, where one of you may well be president, so that you don't hurt yourselves by being so disagreeable. I remember when these debates, when you could disagree, but it would actually excite people rather than divide them.
Well, Frank, I must say I'm impressed on a question on civility that you arranged to have the protesters interrupted midway. That really illustrated the point beautifully. You're right. There has been a coarsening of our public discourse, and it is sad, it's unfortunate. Some of it is exemplified by the fact that you see many in Washington and many in the media who attack those they disagree with and attack all Republicans as being typically either stupid or evil. And I think that is unfortunate, but let me commend the men and women who are running for president as Republicans. Because I think on our side, we have had a civil discussion based on issues, based on substance, based on a positive vision for this country. And I think it is a stark contrast to the Democratic side of the ledger.
Frank,
I think the greatest threat we're facing is the assault on our values, coming from Washington, coming from the media, coming from Hollywood. We're seeing an assault on life, an assault on marriage, an assault on the family, and an assault on religious liberty. We're seeing an assault on the Judeo-Christian values and the constitutional liberties that built America into the greatest country in the history of the world.
And I promise you we'll come back to several of those. And Carly.
I would agree with all that has been said. I guess my way of saying it would be a loss of clarity. We have become a nation where everything is relative. And we know that actually much is black and white. There is good and there is evil. There is right and there is wrong. There are things that work and there are things that don't work. ISIS is evil. It has to be defeated. Some things are right, some things are wrong. We know a family works better for a child, an intact family works better, but somehow we've come to this place where everything is treated as equally good or equally right or equally workable, and it's not. It's a loss of clarity.
So Rick, I promised I'd come back to you. What is the role of what is the role of the government to determine? It's funny, I was expecting this 4 years ago. It didn't happen.
Didn't happen 4 years
and I'm getting it today. What is the role of government in enhancing the family?
Yeah, if you actually look at, there's a couple of books that have been published in the last several years. One by a libertarian by the name of Charles Murray, the other by a liberal by the name of Robert Putnam. One written from the standpoint of a libertarian who doesn't believe in government intervention. One written by a liberal who believes in excessive government intervention. And okay.
Have you ever noticed that liberals come to an event like this and yell at us, but do you ever see conservatives going to their events and interrupting them like that? I mean, seriously?
How do we do both? How do we protect religious liberty and still prevent discrimination? And how do we protect religious liberty even for those who aren't spiritual, for those who don't believe in God, and for all religions? This is a tremendous balance. And Ted, I'm going to start with you.
Well, look, Frank, religious liberty for me has been a passion for decades. And actually, I think all of these questions are interrelated.
Why? Actually, why?
Because it is the first freedom in our country. That it is the first right protected in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. It is the foundation of everything else in America. This country was founded.
But I guess, what does it mean to you
because
personally?
If you can't worship God, all other liberties are taken away. Let me tell you a story from Cuba. After Castro took over Cuba, Castro's army soldiers would go into kindergarten classes. And they would tell all of the kids there, they'd say, close your eyes and pray to Jesus for candy. The kids would do that. Kids would open their eyes, there'd be no candy. Then the soldiers would say, close your eyes and pray to Fidel Castro for candy. The kids would do it and the soldiers would put candy on their desks. That brainwashing started when it was young. And listen, this is personal for me. My grandmother was a 6th grade teacher in Cuba. She was there when Castro took over. She was told, you must brainwash and educate these kids in communism. And my grandmother faced a choice. She ended up feigning insanity. She literally began screaming and foaming at the mouth and ran screaming out of her classroom. She got a doctor friend to fake a diagnosis that she was insane. She would rather live with the shame and the stigma of being insane than participate in brainwashing these kids. And it's one of the real blessings when you come from a family. You know, a lot of folks here have gotten to know my dad. You know, my dad speaks from the heart. When you've seen freedom taken away, it is real, it is personal, and if we don't fight to defend our liberty, we will lose it. Now, when it comes to religious liberty, these issues, I think, are interconnected. Political correctness, the best answer to political correctness is speaking the truth. Why do these protesters want to stand up and scream, stand up and disrupt? Because they can't handle the truth. They don't want the truth. They want to shout you down. You know, you talked about being a university professor. We're seeing universities all across this country with leftist coddled kids, usually with trust funds, protesting against the horrible oppression because the microaggression, I heard a word that scared me. What is wrong with our universities? And the answer to all of this is truth. You know, I was at a rally in front of the White House against this horrible Iranian nuclear deal. The White House press secretary called, there was a rally for the hostages in Iran, people like Pastor Saeed Abedini. The White House called us a pro-war rally because we were rallying for the hostages. Midway through the rally, Code Pink is there. They begin doing just like what these protesters were, screaming and yelling and trying to shut the whole thing down. I was at the microphone in front of a bunch of TV cameras. And I said, you know, the great thing about the First Amendment, it allows civil debate, but it doesn't allow us simply to shout down and silence another speaker. And I invited the head of Code Pink, Medea Benjamin, come on up here. If you want to have a debate, come on up to the microphone right now. You got all the TV cameras. Let's talk about the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, we got to agree, you're not going to scream and yell and holler everyone down. We'll have a discussion about the substance of it. And we had a 20-minute debate. You can Google it and watch the debate back and forth with the head of Code Pink talking about the substance. You know, we had something similar to that. You were talking about religious liberty and discrimination. Here in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair, I was grilling up some pork chops. And a young lady came up and confronted me, who I discovered later was an actress, a woman named Ellen Page. I didn't know who she was at the time, but she confronted me, so I had a conversation with her. And she began attacking, and the standard attack of the left is essentially, why do Republicans hate gay people? Now listen, I'm a Christian. Scripture commands us to love everybody. Every one of us is a sinner. Scripture tells us, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But at the same time, I'm proud to defend both the definition of marriage, the union of one man and one woman that was ordained by God, and the religious liberty of those who believe in a biblical definition of marriage not being persecuted by their government. But I'll tell you, Frank, when I asked Ms. Page, you want to talk about protecting discrimination, tell me, why are you not distressed about the fact that Iran and ISIS are murdering homosexuals right now? Why are you not asking President Obama, why are you sending $100 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei who murders homosexuals? You want to talk about an assault on gay rights? How about not murdering the homosexuals?
So I want to bring it back. Do you really love everybody? It's a serious question. Do you really? You just said you loved everybody. Do you want to take that back?
I believe everyone is a creature of God.
So even those who committed...
Listen, I do believe there is evil.
And you love them.
But let me give an illustration before. And you asked, do I love the human being? Yes, I don't love the evil they commit.
Okay. That's fair. Ted, the president has singled you out for personal criticism, and you challenged him to do it basically to his face, or him to your face. This is your opportunity. You got 1,500 people in this room. If the president were sitting in my chair, what would you tell him?
Mr. President, this is America. Because one of the things that's dangerous about what both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama say is when they say, as Hillary Clinton did, that her enemy is Republicans, she doesn't just mean the people sitting at this stage. She means the people all across this country who terrify her. When Barack Obama in San Francisco talks about the American people back in 2008 as bitter and angry and clinging to our God and our guns, well, we're not bitter. We are getting pretty angry. And you know what? He can't have either our God or our guns.
But I want you to address
so what would I
this
say to,
question.
what would I say to him on this issue?
Yes.
So this week, President Obama twice attacked me overseas. At the beginning of the week in Turkey, he said the fact that I said we shouldn't allow his plan to bring to America tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees, he said that was un-American. And then the next day, in Manila, he said it was offensive. Now set aside the irony of the president standing in Turkey on foreign soil calling me un-American. My response was, you know, it's very easy to toss cheap insults when no one can respond. You want to come back, let's have a debate on your refugee policy. And let's talk about the fact, for example, that number one, these refugees are fleeing the disaster that has been caused by the Obama-Clinton foreign policy that has led to the rise of radical Islam throughout the Middle East. Let's talk about the facts that if you look at the refugees streaming into Europe, one study said that 77% of them were young males. That is an odd demographic for a refugee wave. Let's talk about the fact that it appears right now that at least one of the Paris terrorists came among that refugee wave. Let's talk about the fact that the director of the FBI told Congress the administration cannot remotely vet these refugees because they have no information as to which Syrian Muslims are part of ISIS. So as he told Congress, listen, we can query the database over and over again until the cows come home. If we don't have any information, we can't check background. And it is neither offensive nor un-American to embrace the simple common sense proposition that of course we should defend this nation and not invite in people who the administration cannot guarantee are not terrorists here to murder innocent Americans.
So my question then is a follow-up. Common sense tells us that we should keep these refugees out.
Mm-hmm.
But our faith tells us to help those in genuine need.
But Frank, we are helping them. This is a humanitarian crisis. There are many people genuinely in crisis. They should be resettled in the Middle East, in majority Muslim countries. And one of the things that gets discussed very little, do you know how much money the United States is spending right now resettling these refugees? About $1.2 billion. Do you know the next closest country? About $100 million. We spend more than 10 times what any nation on earth spends. And I get tired of listening to President Obama and Hillary Clinton lecture the American people that we're somehow ungenerous when we're providing for these people, but we don't want to risk the safety of our children here at home.
Ted, when would you not, I want to do the other side of this, when are troops not justified? What conflicts are out there that you've seen where you would say, no, this is not a place for the American military?
Listen, the use of military force is the most serious decision any commander-in-chief makes. And I believe military force is justified only to protect the vital national security interest of the United States of America. I think the most consistent failing of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy is that it ignores the vital national security interest of the United States. You know, you asked a minute ago, Frank, is President Obama an armchair quarterback? It's worse than that. The policies he's advancing are helping the other team.
Then why does he do it?
And let me give some basis to that.
What's the motivation of it? That's a very strong criticism.
It is very strong
What's
criticism.
the motivation of it?
You know, look, I am neither a psychologist nor a priest. So what I will say is, listen, this is a president who in the past week said on the national stage, he doesn't have time for American leadership or America winning. I got to say, FDR and JFK and Ronald Reagan were rolling over in their graves at a president saying he doesn't have time for America winning. And it is worse.
Did he actually use those words?
Yes. Yes, he did.
He doesn't have time for America winning.
He said, I don't want to talk about American leadership. I don't want to talk about America winning. I don't have time for it. That was the formulation he used. And it's important to understand, President Obama, number one, today is serving as an apologist for radical Islamic terrorism. Now, what does an apologist mean? Because you're right, that is a serious charge. An apologist is someone who gives a rationalization, a justification, tries to explain it. You know, I remember I was at last year the National Prayer Breakfast. It was the day after, if you'll recall, the Jordanian pilot was lit on fire by ISIS. And President Obama stood in front of the National Prayer Breakfast and said, well, yes, ISIS has done some bad things, but Christians and Jews have also done bad things. And then he invokes the Crusades and the Inquisition. Now, last I checked, both of those ended hundreds and hundreds of years ago. I don't think it's asking too much to ask the president to stay in the current millennium. And that is exactly the argument that the terrorist makes. It's the argument ISIS makes as they invoke the Crusades. This week, John Kerry said the attack of the Islamic terrorist on Charlie Hebdo was understandable and justifiable. Listen, I think John Kerry should resign in disgrace.
So allow me this, because that's a fair point. I promised I would never do it. I will only do it for this one question. How many of you, by show of hands, would demand John Kerry's resignation for what he said? Raise your hands.
Let us answer that with a statement rather than a show of hands, Frank. You said you wouldn't do it, so don't do it. So keep your word. You said you wouldn't ask us to show your hands.
I do want to say something, Frank, without the hand showing, which I agree rarely conveys all the information people want to convey. But let me say something. You know, we had a lot of conversation before about the President Hillary Clinton's refusal to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. The press goes, well, why do the semantics matter? They matter because it's understanding the enemy you're fighting. If you look at when President Obama has been willing to use military force, in almost every instance, it has helped radical Islamic terrorists. So at the beginning of the administration, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton led the world and led NATO, toppling Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi was a bad guy, but he was an ally in fighting radical Islamic terrorism. Instead, they handed that country over to a war zone of radical Islamic terrorists. In Egypt, President Obama and Hillary Clinton toppled Mubarak. Again, a terrible human rights record, but he was an ally of America. And this administration essentially put the Muslim Brotherhood in power that funds terrorists across the globe. In Syria, President Obama wants to bomb Assad. Assad is a bad man, but if he topples Assad, we'll hand Syria over to radical Islamic terrorists. In every instance, they're weakening the United States and aiding our enemies, and that is dangerous. You know, I'm reminded of an old story about a man driving down the road. And he sees a little boy on the side of the road with a box of kittens. And the boy has a sign that says, "Free kittens, they're Democrats." The man thinks how strange that is, and he drives on, doesn't worry about it anymore. A few days later, the man is driving on the same road. He sees that same boy, same box, same kittens. Except this time, the little boy has a sign that says, "Free kittens, they're Republicans." Now, at this point, the man is deeply puzzled, thinks this is one of the most curious things he's ever seen. He pulls off on the side of the road. He walks up to the little boy and says, "Son, I don't understand. A few days ago I was here. You said these kittens were Democrats. Now you say they're Republicans." And the kid looks at him and goes, "Well, mister, now their eyes are open." You know, Hillary Clinton may think we are her enemies, but we are not. Our object is very simple, which is to open people's eyes that there is a better way than the path we are on. You know, what I am so inspired by here is the men and women here love America. I love this country with all of my heart, and we understand our country is in crisis. You know, Frank, you asked, what question would you want to answer? More than anything else, I think the question that is weighing on all of our hearts is, how do we win? How do we win and turn this around? How do we pull back? It is now or never. There is an urgency to this election. I look at my daughters, Caroline and Catherine, at age 7 and 5, and I think, we cannot go another 4 or 8 more years down this road. There comes a point where the country is lost, and it is now or never. How do we win? And so that's the question I want to answer is, how do we win? And you know, Washington, the consultants, the press, they all tell us the same thing, that we win when we run to the middle, when we run as Democrat light, when we stand for nothing. And every time we do it, we get whooped. Over and over and over again. I'm a numbers guy. If you look at 2004, the last race we won, you compare it to 2008 and 12. By far the biggest difference is the millions of conservatives who showed up in 04, who stayed home in 08 and stayed home in bigger numbers in 12. There are 2 major groups. Number one, evangelical Christians. There are about 90 million evangelicals in America. In the last election, 2012, 54 million evangelicals stayed home. Think about that number. A majority of evangelical Christians did not vote. The other major group are the so-called Reagan Democrats. They're the blue-collar Catholics across the Midwest up into New England, union members, gun owners, pro-life, strong national defense. If we're going to win, we have to energize and inspire and motivate the millions of conservatives staying home. I'll tell you this, the evangelical Christians, the Reagan Democrats, if the body of Christ rises up at one and votes our values, we turn this country around. Now, let me tell you what Washington wants. Washington wants us divided. There are a lot of wonderful men and women running for president on the Republican side. We are so fortunate, and I'll tell you, any Republican president would be a fool for the men and women on the debate stage not to comprise a major portion of the cabinet. We have phenomenal leaders. But what Washington wants is conservatives divided. They don't care how, by the way. They want a chunk of conservatives over here, a chunk of evangelicals over here, a chunk of libertarians over there, a chunk of Tea Party folks over there. And that's how over and over again the moderate candidate runs up the middle with 23% of the vote, steals the nomination, and then loses the general and hands the election to Hillary Clinton. We have one simple task among us for conservatives to unite. If conservatives come together as stand as one, it's game over. This primary is over if conservatives unite. And if conservatives stand together and unite, the general election is over. And so the question I would suggest that all of us should ask.
And Ted, the debate needs to be over.
I thought it wasn't a debate.
The forum needs to be over.
The question I think all of us should ask is, Scripture gives us the test for deciding. It says, you shall know them by their fruits. We should ask, who has stood and led on all three legs of the Republican school as a fiscal conservative, a social conservative, a national security conservative? If we stand together, we'll pull this country back from the brink. We'll get back to the Constitution. We will restore our liberty. We will restore our Judeo-Christian values, and we will restore the incredible promise of this nation that every one of us loves so much. Thank you.
Thank you.